Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Chris Sun. I am the project manager for the Bureau of Justice Assistance's Strategies for Policing Innovation initiative. I'm going to provide some opening comments, and then I'm going to hand it over to our experts and sites so that they can give you a taste of what they've been doing on this very important topic. So, on behalf of BJA, let me welcome you to the webinar. Today's webinar focuses on an often overlooked activity of innovative initiatives supported through external funding in any field, sustainability. The progress and impact an initiative is having can come to a halt unless an agency plans for sustainability and ongoing support from the start. Understanding the importance of planning for life after external funding is paramount to institutionalizing the initiative into day-to-day operations of an agency. Today, we will hear from a variety of perspectives on the issue, including SPI sites that have thoughtfully considered how to integrate SPI innovations into their agencies. First, we will hear from Dr. Mike White, professor at Arizona State University's School of Criminology and Criminal Justice and senior subject expert for SPI. Dr. White will set the context by discussing practices, principles, and challenges of sustainability and development of a sustainment plan. He will be followed by presentations from representatives in 3 SPI sites who will discuss and describe their agency's approach to sustaining their SPI initiative. This includes Mr. Christian Peterson, Crime Analyst, Strategic Services Division, Portland Police Bureau, Captain Ryan Mills, East Patrol Division, Kansas City, Missouri Police Department, as well as Deputy Chief David LaValle and Captain Kari Sloan from the Detroit Police Department. Following these presentations, we will have time for questions and some dialogue facilitated by Dr. White and our SPI staff. We are especially grateful to our presenters for today's webinar. We thank them for contributing their time and sharing their experiences with us. Please honor the sincere effort these individuals have put into their presentations by offering your perspectives and experiences as well as asking questions. This webinar is one in a series sponsored by the Bureau of Justice Assistance and coordinated by CNA for the SPI initiative. We thank BJA for its investment in this initiative and in the Innovation Suite approach to justice system improvement, as well as the range of technical assistance resources and opportunities for agencies implementing, researching new strategies and tactics. The Bureau supports state, county, local, and tribal law enforcement agencies in many, many ways, and we are grateful that they do. Let me also take a moment to thank Charles Stevenson and Emma Wohl at CNA, who do the great preparation and background work to make sure these webinars go smoothly. And I do hope Charles is staying safe and dry as he's weathering the hurricane. I will now hand it over to Emma Wohl, who will provide you some logistical details on how to use the webinar platform as we go through the presentations. Emma?
Thank you, Chris, and thank you to our panelists and attendees for joining us today. First, I'd like to start off by asking our attendees to please mute your phone during the webinar. You can either do this by pressing the mute button on your phone or through the software by pressing *6. At the end of the webinar, there will be time for question and answers with our panelists. If you have questions during the webinar, please send them through the Q&A feature at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. At the end of the webinar, you can also ask your question via your phone, and you can unmute your phone by pressing #6. If you have any technical difficulties during the webinar, please feel free to use the Q&A function to make those known. You can also chat the Strategies for Policing Innovation account individually. At the end of this webinar, the slides will be posted on the SPI website, so please check back on the website and look for those if you're interested in learning more. At this point, I will turn it over to Dr. Mike White to start us off our discussion.
just a little bit of background about me before I get into my presentation. I've been involved with SPI from the start, and so I come at this sustainability question from a couple of different perspectives. One, I've been a research partner for SPI sites a number of times. Glendale, Arizona was one of the inaugural SPI sites way back in 2009, and I was the research partner for Glendale, and they received another SPI grant a few years later. And then I'm also currently the research partner for one of the brand new SPI sites, Tempe, Arizona. In addition to that, I've been working with CNA as a subject matter expert since about 2011. So I've been thinking about sustainability for a while, and I come at this question both as a research partner working with a grantee agency, as well as somebody working with CNA trying to figure out how to make these things last beyond a grant period. So let me see if I can move these slides, and I can. So I'm going to start off and kind of just lay a foundation for my co-presenters, and I want to do that in a couple of different ways. One, I want to think about this and talk about sustainability from, think of it as kind of a 30,000-foot level. What does sustainability mean? How do we define it? What does it mean for SPI? But I also want to talk about more ground level issues. We're going to hear from some of our current sites on this issue of sustainability, but I want to look back. We've got a 10-year history with prior sites that we can look at, and we can think about some of the common challenges that sites have faced and how they've gotten around those challenges. And once that foundation is laid, then we can, we'll hear from our current sites and some of the really good things that they're up to. So I think we need to start any discussion of sustainability with a definition, and we need to make sure that we all are coming at this from the same perspective. And sustainability is one of those terms that you hear it and you think you know what it is, but when you try to define it, sometimes that doesn't come very easily. So let's start with a definition, and there are two pieces to defining sustainability, at least from my perspective. One is that you're trying to institutionalize change. You've done something new, whether it's part of a SPI or something else. You've implemented some sort of innovation. Maybe it's a new technology like body-worn cameras, or a new strategy like hotspots or problem-oriented policing. The idea is you want to institutionalize that practice or technology beyond an initial grant period. The other part of the definition, though, is that presumably that innovation that you've implemented, whether it's body cameras or hotspots, it's produced something valuable, some sort of good, and you want to continue to experience that value, and you want to do that beyond that grant period. So those are the two key pieces, that you're trying to embed change, and you're trying to, by embedding that change, continue to experience the benefits that have been generated. And those benefits can be any number of things. It can be, a reduction in crime. It could be reductions in use of force or citizen complaints, cost savings, you name it. But whatever it is, you're trying to continue to experience those benefits. Now, sustainability is a core kind of foundational principle in SPI. So if you go back to 2008, 2009 and find that original kind of master plan of SPI, you'll see sustainability is a part of that. And if you are an SPI site, you know that sustainability is something that gets stressed early on. It's part of the action plan process. BJA and CNA want you thinking about sustainability early on. And if you've waited until year 2 or year 3 of your project to begin to think about sustainability, you've probably missed the bus. So the idea here is to think about it early on, but also to think about it strategically. You're not going to sustain something by accident. You have to have some pretty thorough planning of how this is going to happen. A couple of other key points to keep in mind with sustainability. Certainly, you're going to need buy-in and support from the organization, pretty much top to bottom. And one of the key aspects of that is the buy-in from the line level in your organization, as well as from first-line supervisors. So whatever your innovation is, whether it's body cameras or foot patrol or hotspots, it's the folks at the line level that are going to be implementing this. So that means you're going to need their support and their buy-in. But you're also going to need the support from the top of the organization as well, from the leadership. And when I've been working with sites, one of the big red flags for CNA and for the subject matter experts when we're talking to an SPI site, or whether it be on a conference call or in a national meeting, if we're talking to the chief and the chief really has no idea what's going on, that's a red flag. So you need the commitment from the top of the organization. The other thing to keep in mind, though, is you want to think broadly in terms of sustainability. It is much easier to sustain your innovation if you have support from folks outside of your law enforcement agency, and that can be the community, it could be city government, it could be the prosecutor's office. But if you have support from outside folks, that can really go a long way in terms of being successful with sustainability. The other piece to think about with SPI is that not everything is worth sustaining. SPI agencies often push the envelope and implement new kind of cutting edge tactics or strategies or technologies. And sometimes at the end of the day you find out it just didn't. Too costly for the benefits that were generated. So it's important to keep that in mind. And one good example is what the Tempe, Arizona Police Department is now doing as part of their SPI. And like I said, I'm the research partner. They are basically building from scratch their own tailored de-escalation training program. And we're going to take about a year to build it. Then we're going to do a randomized controlled trial. Half the patrol force is going to get the training, and then we're going to see if it worked. We're going to evaluate it. And if we find that it didn't have the impact that we hoped, then we're not going to sustain it. Some other important points to keep in mind when we think about sustainability in the SPI. There are a couple of different approaches that you can take to sustainability. One is you can try to sustain kind of the broad SPI principles. And so you see some examples on this slide: analysis, collaboration, research, partnership. So maybe as part of your SPI, your crime analysts were trained in social network analysis. And now the grant period's over, and you're going to continue to use social network analysis to identify offender groups and things like that. Or perhaps you developed a research partnership as part of this SPI that didn't exist before. So now you're working with an academic or a research organization, and you want to continue to do that moving forward. So you can think about sustainability on a kind of a higher level. But you can also think about it in terms of just the specific innovations that have been implemented, a new strategy or a tactic. So, you can think about continuing to implement foot patrol or expanding body-worn cameras or hotspots, whatever it is that you implemented, whatever that innovation was. And like I said, we have a 10-year history now that we can draw on to see what has worked and what hasn't worked in terms of sustainability. And on this slide, you see a couple of examples from that 10-year history of things that have been pretty successful. First on the list is building SPI into either officer performance evaluations or promotional exams. I'll use Glendale as an example because I was involved in that. What Glendale did is they incorporated questions about SPI into their sergeant and lieutenant's promotional exams. And so, I get calls fairly frequently from officers who are going up for promotion, officers I don't know, and they're contacting me because they knew I was the research partner and they want to pick my brain a little bit about the SPI because they know that those questions are going to come up during their oral board. A variety of other things, reaching out to other agencies in the region, Kansas City in particular with their Casey Nova project, which was a focused deterrence project, comes to mind. Collaborating with external stakeholders. The Reno SPI targeted prescription drug abuse problems, and they developed, the PD there developed some working relationships both with pharmacists and with physicians. Enhancing crime analysis, and another good example is putting SPI into training. And you can do that a variety of ways. You can build that into your academy training, so as new employees are coming on board, they're being exposed to it. Or you can do it as roll call or online training. SPI sometimes will involve just a single unit in a police department, and the more that you can expand the knowledge of SPI beyond that one unit, the more likely you're going to be able to sustain it. Again, drawing on the history that we have over 10 years, what's worked and what hasn't worked. What we see on this slide are some things that can facilitate sustainability. First on the list is to identify a measure of success. So remember the definition of sustainability that I gave a minute or two ago? You want to sustain something that has benefits, that has some value for your organization. Well, if you're going to do that, you have to figure out how you're going to measure that. So basically we're talking about the does it work question. Identify your measure of success. And this is where your research partner is going to play a prominent role in terms of figuring out how that value is going to be operationalized. Another element of a good sustainability strategy is to find a champion. This often will be one officer, and not necessarily at the top of the organization. It could be a patrol officer, a sergeant, lieutenant, but this one person is going to kind of take over the day-to-day responsibility for the project. It's going to be the eyes and ears of the project. It's going to spread the word, and often this person is someone who's very influential in the department, has a lot of respect up and down the chain of command. Certainly another thing you want to think about is to publicize your successes right away. As I said, SPI sites often test innovative strategies or technologies, and sometimes there'll be resistance to that. Body-worn cameras can be a good example. And you can overcome some of the initial resistance by publicizing some of the successes you have. So if you have an officer, a couple officers that are exonerated from complaints because of body-worn camera footage, you want to publicize that. You want to get that word out so that whatever resistance there may be to the technology, you can overcome that. Engaging stakeholders also very important. Don't act like you're in a silo. Think about the other folks that have a stake in this. I think about the original Glendale, Arizona project, which targeted convenience store crime, which turned out to basically be a Circle K problem at the 15 Circle Ks in Glendale, not the other 65 or 70 convenience stores. So, we immediately engaged with the corporate leadership of Circle K, as well as with other law enforcement agencies in the Valley that were struggling with the same problem. And again, demonstrating value, making sure that you're disseminating the good work that's being done, both in the police department as well as outside. Again, drawing on that history, what are some of the challenges that we've seen for agencies over the last 10 years as they try to sustain their SPIs? Certainly, one of the challenges I've already talked a little bit about, that internal resistance. But there's another piece to that I think we need to think about, and that is this kind of mindset with chasing grants and chasing grant money. And a lot of agencies have this mentality where you identify a grant opportunity, you write a proposal, lo and behold, you get the grant. So now you spend the next 2 or 3 years delivering the goods, whatever you said you were going to do. You write your final report. Boom, you move on, and you're looking for the next grant opportunity. So you're basically jumping from one thing to the next without thinking about how you're going to sustain whatever it is you did in that last grant opportunity. Leadership turnover can be a real struggle, and your champion that you picked, like I said, the champion often is someone who's good at the job. They're influential. They have a lot of respect. Well, when you have a 3-year project, those folks tend to be promoted and reassigned, and so you have to think about that. And certainly that can happen at the top of the organization as well. External events can happen that have the potential to derail your SPI. I'm thinking about the Boston SPI. They were in kind of a critical stage of their SPI project when the Boston Marathon bombing happened, and obviously that had an impact on their ability to sustain, kind of what they were up to. Gaining external support and trust. Departments differ in terms of the relationships that they have with the community, And sometimes it can be difficult to get that external trust and support. The one example I'm thinking of is the Palm Beach County SPI from a few years ago. Their SPI focused on engagement with the Guatemalan community in that area. And the fact of the matter was that a significant number of the residents in that community were not documented. They were undocumented, so that presented some trust issues. Limited resources, of course, can be a problem, as well as measuring effectiveness. And you know, I speak from the perspective of a research partner. Some outcomes are very easy to measure, and others are not. How do you measure organizational change? It can be difficult at times. Also, you know, you may have a hard time with a research partner if it's someone you haven't worked with before, or maybe you haven't worked with a research partner at all, ever. And it's almost like, you know, that first couple of dates where you're trying to figure each other out and you're trying to, you know, speak the same language, and that can be a challenge.
No, we don't.
Just a couple of closing thoughts before I turn it over to my co-presenters. You know, I really like the idea of integrating SPI into the training. Like I said, often SPI will be kind of centered in a particular unit of a department, and the more that you can extend the knowledge of SPI to other officers in the department, the better. And one great way to do that is through training. Another way to spread the good word is to create an agency working group for your SPI that includes lots of different folks from lots of different agencies. So, for example, the Tempe SPI focused on de-escalation. We have a working group that includes representatives from every unit in the department, from patrol to first-line supervisors to investigations to training to legal, and everyone is involved and has a say and is giving input. Another point, you know, when you write your grant proposal, a lot of times you've got to do a budget, of course, and you're thinking about the budget, and you're you know, putting a lot of overtime into the SPI work. And the danger there is if you become over-reliant on the overtime, because what happens when the overtime money goes away, when the grant's done? There's a real possibility that the SPI activities are going to go away. So the more that you can integrate SPI into kind of the routine, regular duties of officers rather than relying on overtime, the better chance you're going to have to sustain it. Some of these things I've talked about, so I'll hit them real quick. Dissemination. Again, making sure you're spreading the good word both inside and outside the agency. Reduce that unfamiliarity with SPI. You want people to know what you're doing and what this thing's all about. You know, and related to that, the stakeholder engagement, the community engagement. You know, think about can you get to the point at the end of your SPI, at the end, you know, 3 years down the road, where the community, the residents in your community demand that those SPI activities continue or be expanded. And again, I'll use the body-worn camera example. So maybe as part of your SPI, you're rolling out body-worn cameras in a particular precinct or sector. Can you get to the point where you're now going to expand that because the community demands that, and you have to be responsive to that? And the last point I'll make before I turn it over is, you know, you're going to have to be flexible. You know, SPI agencies are responsive. They make decisions based on data, and sometimes you make a course correction, and you do that based on, you know, something you didn't anticipate or a change in the data or there's external events. And you know, the successful SPI agencies that can sustain their initiatives are the ones that can be adaptable, that can make those changes on the fly. And, you know, nimble and adaptable aren't words that we typically use to describe law enforcement agencies, but, you know, in the 21st century and in SPI, that's really what we need to be, thinking about. So that's all I had. I think at this point, I'm going to come back on the back end, but I'm going to turn it over to, I believe, Christian, and let's see if I can get him the slides here. All right, Christian, I believe it's all you.
Perfect. Thank you, Mike. Hello, everybody. My name is, let me just see if I can figure out how to work these slides. My name is Christian Peterson. I'm a crime analyst with the Portland Police Bureau, and I'm going to be talking about sustaining change in our experience as it relates to the neighborhood involvement location, a community-focused directed patrol. It's a form of hotspot policing. I'm going to start by talking about 3 different elements. A little bit about our city background, our project, and our path to sustainability. I'm going to talk about framing Portland and how our initial motivation, our initial innovation was motivated, and embarking on a randomized control trial. I will speak directly about the intervention we have developed, and finally I will discuss our path to sustainability, basics, obstacles, and opportunities. Looking at the city of Portland, much like many cities across the United States, we are facing and seeing changes in service needs. Our city's population has risen approximately 7% in 5 years. Our calls for service have increased by almost 28% during that same time span. All of this is occurring while our uniformed patrol officers first dipped and have finally stabilized over the 5 years time frame. Though our patrol population has finally stabilized, the number of those officers that are in initial training phase has drastically increased. Therefore, we still don't have the same strength that we had 5 years ago. All of this is occurring while we're trying to do an intervention, motivating us to implement change. So now I'm going to jump right into our intervention. And what we did is, you're going to hear me use the word NILOC, neighborhood involvement location, or hotspot. All of them are meaning the same thing. We are Portland, so Portland's a little unique. So we use neighborhood involvement location because we also took a little twist, which I'm going to talk about. We conducted a randomized control trial on hotspot policing with 90 specific locations. Each location was 2 city blocks by 2 city blocks, which is about 500 feet by 500 feet for the city of Portland. We had 30 control sites, 30 sites that had 2 additional patrols per day, and 30 sites that had 4 additional patrols per day. These locations represented 18% of our crime and 19% of our dispatch calls for service, and only 1% of our city. We significantly deviated from a lot of the hotspot literature in that we were focused predominantly on relationship building, and that all of our activity was integrated into our CAD system, creating a way of tracking all of our information. We chose to utilize the CAD system because we, just like the previous presenters mentioned, we reached out to other agencies and saw what was working and what wasn't working. And we noticed that a lot of agencies that had implemented hotspot policing were not doing that activity anymore due to the administrative costs. But I know most people here are really interested about sustainability. And so I wanted to jump right into basics, the basics of our sustainability. And that starts with having an executive champion. And we were very lucky. Former Chief Reese for Portland saw a presentation on hotspot policing and decided, regardless of the budget, wanted to make it happen. Having this champion allowed us to build momentum, laying the foundation for all the sustainability efforts that we have implemented since. Without having an executive champion, we wouldn't have been able to start, but we wouldn't have been able to build the other elements that allowed us to succeed. The next consideration was building a team. This cross-functional representative team required that we not only have representatives from the command staff, which who knows how long they would be there, but include people from the line, from our dispatching, from our records division, anybody and everyone that could be impacted by our intervention. They helped integrate this and took ownership of this project, and in the future helped become some of their champions. And then the third piece of it, to our basics, was integrating into our traditional workflow. Removing administrative roadblocks, we were able to accomplish this by integrating again into our CAD system. Officers were engaging a system that they already were accustomed to using, and the training requirements were minimal. What it did is it kept it as a feeling of this is business as usual, which is key when we're trying to implement change in our industry. So the next part is obstacles, and I look at obstacles as an opportunity and as a potential to learn things, because like Mike said, not everything works, and you just need to take that into consideration. You can get good parts and bad parts of any kind of implementation, and you want to take the best parts of that and move them on. All of the items that I had previously mentioned are instrumental in getting our intervention up and running with an eye on sustainability. However, changes will occur. New obstacles will present themselves, and new opportunities will also arise. Talking about executive championships and leadership there, it's vital to have that, but you also have to realize that you're going to have change. During the course of our intervention, we have had 6 chiefs, 4 unit commanders, and 2 program managers, all during this life of one grant. If we assigned ourselves just to having that chief and him being the only voice or having just one champion, we would have had that siloed, and it would have fallen apart once he left. So you really have to make sure that you build that relationships throughout the Bureau, build those champions up. Looking at funding. Funding is something one must always look at. We went with this approach: how can we automate as much as possible, eliminating personnel time for support pieces. We wanted to focus on areas where we can develop different things that would make this possible. With our hotspot policing, we increased workload for officers by 13 to 15%. That was 15,000 calls per service during the summer. By doing that, we needed to, if we wanted to sustain that, we needed to make it so that it didn't take personnel typing all those calls into our CAD dispatch system. So we actually created a batch uploading process that allowed us to take what was at one point in time weeks of work and turn it into a push of a button. And so thinking about how can you automate processes. Talking about communications, both internally and externally. And not talking about it as just as this is the grant or this is SPY. It's about this is talking about progress, talking about impact, talking about importance. How does it affect and impact all different levels of the Bureau? How can you tie this communication so that everybody understands not only what you're doing, but why it's worth sustaining? It doesn't have to be the entire program worth sustaining. Elements of the program can be worth sustaining. Training. This is something where we kind of fell victim to a process where we really did an initial great push of training officers and line leaders about the program and about everything. But you have to think about training not only as, okay, we're going to implement a change, but how do we sustain this training afterwards? You know, we integrated this into our sergeant promotion exam, but as I was talking about earlier, we have a transition from officers, a bunch of new trainees. Is it built into their in-processing, their new training materials? Do you do that if you aren't sure if it's going to work? These are all things to consider. And then, of course, for us was sustaining technology. Right after we finished our randomized control trial, we switched RMSs. And does the implementation and the strategies that you've integrated work with the new system? When you're looking at new systems or new technologies, how can you tie in existing projects into the workflow of the new technology? I'm going to conclude with a little bit about just some sustainability opportunities. Celebrating milestones, Mike mentioned that as well. Really looking at it as you're going across the bridge, if the only thing you celebrate is your finish line, then people will think that it's over, that you've accomplished your feat. But all along the way, each time you get past an arch, you should be thinking about what is it that I just accomplished. Oh, we integrated this with a new system, or we just finished phase 1, or we had this positive outcome. Telling people, the community, telling the officers what you did and how it was successful, and if things didn't work, also owning up and making sure that you communicate that as well. Communication is really key. The next piece I'm going to talk about is the replication of learning. and for us, that was really, it's integrating your successes into other areas that might benefit from what you've learned from your grant. We were very lucky in that right after we were finishing our experimental phase, a detective from our sex offender registration detail in our detectives unit said, hey, can you apply what you've done with this program about getting somebody to a certain location for our technology? And took a little doing, but we were able to integrate the address verification checks that are required by our state into our system, and now we've had over 3,000 address verifications, which we could not ever document before. So all of this, by creating it into our CAD system, by creating a system that was automated, all allowed us to create actionable data that actually mattered to the line leaders. And then learning from your failures. I mean, that was another big point is not everything's going to be successful. When we did our intervention, our first part of it, the experiment, we increased workload by 12 to 15%. Anybody who's ever done any kind of request from the police will automatically know that when you're increasing people's workload by 12 to 15% and there's no additional pay for them, that's a huge stress on them. And so we really realized that a lot of it was we had to scale a lot of our intervention back and make it so that we can bridge this to smaller locations, more specific, and less frequently, so that we can build for the future. If anybody has any questions, of course I'm going to be here till the end, and they can always reach out to me. And now I'm going to hand this presentation off to Captain Mills. Thank you.
Thank you, Christian, and thank you for the opportunity to be a part of this presentation today. I appreciate SPI and the CNA staff for organizing it. I also want to thank Christian for having us out to Portland when our program was in the infancy of it. There in the beginning. His assistance was appreciated much by everyone as we kind of figured out what we were doing. A lot of what I'm going to say isn't particularly groundbreaking or anything new that you might hear, because I believe a lot of the sustaining principles are common amongst all projects. You know, a little bit of what we're doing is a little bit different from what somebody else is doing or from what, you know, Detroit's doing or what Portland's doing, but the same core values really run through all of it. A little bit about Kansas City. We have about 500,000 people, almost 1,400 officers. We are typically one of the more violent cities in the United States. Last year we had 151 homicides, about just over 30 per 100,000. It's a little bit up from years past, but this year, thankfully, we're trending in the correct direction. Like most cities, our most violent area is concentrated in a small geographic location. About half our homicides occur within an area about 1/10 the size of the city. I'm assigned to East Patrol Division, which is one of the more violent divisions or the most violent division within the city. It's about 45 square miles. The homicide rate just within East Patrol Division, if you're looking at per 100,000, is around 70 per 100,000, so more than twice the average of the city. It is East Patrol Division is largely residential, predominantly a lower income neighborhoods. There is some commercial areas and actually a couple rural areas within the Patrol Division, but predominantly is all lower income residential. Real briefly, our SPI project is a combination of geographic and offender-based as well. We kind of mold the two together and work towards reduction of violent crime within micro hotspots. So looking at, you know, sustaining the practices and the principles, you know, I think whenever we think about that, and a big part of this in my mind is communicating what we're doing and why we're doing it. But in doing that, we can't say it's the, you know, we want to try and stay away from it's the new or the next best thing. We don't want to talk about it's the grant. You know, to me that alludes to that it's temporary. It's not something that's going to be around forever. It sets the stage for a lack of sustainability, at least historically within our police department, because grant projects don't always stay around. They're temporary. At some point, the grant ends, and so we don't want to set it up for failure to begin with. And we have to really, I think, work on explaining why we're doing what we're doing, what the reasoning is. You know, if we want to get that buy-in from the beginning, and particularly from the line-level officers, we have to talk about why we're doing what we're doing, how it's going to benefit them, what the advantage of doing it is, how it's not just, you know, we're not just flying by the seat of our pants, and we're really kind of paying attention to what we're doing and how it's going to benefit them. So, you know, what are some of the things that we think about whenever we do this? Well, you know, we have to realize that we're like most police departments. We don't have unlimited resources. We don't have unlimited people. We don't have unlimited money. There's a reason for doing this, but the reason can't be it's all about the money. You know, it can't be we're looking for a way to help pay the bills with something that we want to try. We really have to kind of get our priorities straight and realize what we're doing is actually trying to reduce crime. We just don't have the means to do it on our own, so we're getting a little bit of help. And how are we going to do that? We also really have to work with our community. You know, I talked about our line officers, but the community. Here in Kansas City, the community is involved with the police department. We have to get, you know, their involvement and their understanding is expected. Now, I caution by saying, you know, the same reason we don't tell the officers, or we don't try and talk a lot about it being a grant project, or we don't refer to it with the officers as a grant project. We do the same thing with the community. You know, accurately, yes, it is a grant project, but I think some of the same misconceptions or perceptions that the community may have is the same thing our officers have, and so we really are careful in the way we present that information. You know, when do we start thinking about doing all these things? From the very beginning, if not before the beginning. You're right, you know, was mentioned earlier, we don't know if it's going to be worth sustaining, but if it is, and that ship's already sailed, then it's really hard to get it back and make those changes to where we can get the buy-in and the understanding from the line level staff and the supervisors and the department in general. It's not always an easy thing to do, but it is. You know, what are some of those challenges? Well, you know, you hear a lot of it's always been this way, or there's not any new tricks, or, you know, we don't have the blank necessary to do this. Well, those are, I mean, probably every organization that's listening to this presentation has heard that to some degree. Well, you're right. I mean, you know, it has always been one way, but it doesn't mean that one way is right. You know, you may not have whatever it is necessary you need to, but there's a way to work towards obtaining the tools necessary or demonstrating the viability of whatever project is you're working towards to demonstrate that it is usable and it is worth sustaining and that there is opportunities to make it sustainable. And I believe most organizations can sustain most anything if given that it's a high enough priority. You know, there's a bureaucracy of the organization you have to consider as well. Portland, through their NILAC project, they went through a multitude of different chiefs, and it was difficult for them, I can imagine, to sustain the importance of their presentation throughout the changes in command in Portland. You know, we've gone through a change in our chief as well. Chief Smith here is progressive, and it's important for him that we work towards a reduction of violent crime. And he is a very much think outside the box. Whatever we need to do, let's do it. And so that was definitely a benefit for us when he came into that role as police chief, to where we didn't have to make a lot of changes or a lot of adaptations to our process, and we had his support. You know, looking back, what are some of the things that we've learned? Well, you know, we don't necessarily know where we're going with this. You know, if it is a sustainable program is yet to really be seen. Do we know that it's worth sustaining? I think we're getting there, but we're not towards the end of our project either. We've seen some preliminary results or some preliminary indications that we're doing the right thing, but then again, that comes at a cost too. And is the cost and the benefit, you know, do they equal out? Is the benefit worth the cost? You know, so we don't know exactly, but we know the direction that we're heading, and we know where we've been, and we just need to create a plan to put those two lines together. you know, is there some resistance to change? You know, two of the I guess the best and the worst thing in policing is sometimes both change. Everybody wants things to change, but then whenever they do, nobody's happy about it. So we're doing something a little bit different in a new way. You know, we're getting from A to B a little bit differently, and not everyone is comfortable with that. But we really need to work to implement the reasons why and how it's a benefit, and assuming it is a benefit. We're talking about, you know, integrating those changes. You know, it really involves most everyone on the police department. They may not be directly involved in our SPI project, but the project impacts them in one way or another to some degree. Even the front desk clerks who take walk-in reports from the community. What we do as part of this project doesn't necessarily impact them, but it does impact them in the way that you know, policing is done throughout the community, and I think everybody has to have some degree of awareness of it. And that's really what we're working towards, is building the awareness, moving in the right direction, understanding the principles, and properly communicating those principles throughout our organization, and working towards building in those basics from the very beginning. If it is a sustainable project and you set it up right, I believe it will sustain itself on its own. It takes a whole lot of work in the beginning, but if something works and something is better than another system that you're using, I believe it will naturally continue along down that path. You know, it's not going to be, no project will be a one-stop shop or will fix everything. It's just another tool in the tool belt, is the way I view that. You know, I appreciate the opportunity to present to you today. I appreciate your time, and if there's anything I can do for anyone listening, then, you know, as Christian said, we'll both be around for a while, and thank you very much. With that, I will pass it on to Deputy Chief David LaValle and Captain Kari Sloan from Detroit. Thank you.
All right, I'm Deputy Chief LaValle, Detroit Police. I'm going to talk about an initiative that we implemented a few years ago and we've been able to sustain for the last couple years. It's actually growing. It's called Project Greenlight Detroit. I'll start with a little bit of background about the city. We're a population of just under 700,000, just over 3,000 members of our department. Over the last few years, Detroit has experienced declines in crime in almost every single category. For about the last 5 years, we still have a very high crime rate, something that we continue to work on every day. But one of the areas that I want to focus on in the crime stats that are listed there are the robberies and carjackings. So this year to date, we're just over 200 carjackings, and that kind of takes me into what started us on Project Greenlight Detroit. At our ComStat meetings 4 or 5 years ago, we were at about 800 carjackings and 4,000 robberies in the city at that time. And so as we were doing an analysis of those crimes, we saw repeated trends that kept coming up that had to do with gas stations, liquor stores. We saw a lot of carjackings and robberies that were occurring in gas station parking lots. And so a further analysis revealed that 25% of the violent crime in our city after 10 p.m. was happening within 500 feet of a gas station. So out of that was born the idea of Project Greenlight. So the idea came up that what if we had businesses throughout the city that we created safe havens, we installed high-quality cameras at the locations that had a direct feed to police headquarters, improved the lighting, advertised at the location with signs and a light, increased officer presence at these locations. Could we really have an impact on carjackings and robberies in the city? So we got together with 8 businesses, gas station owners in the city that we thought would be good participants to start a pilot project. We engaged those business owners, and they agreed to bear the expense of the cameras, the improved lighting, the signage, and the increased internet bandwidth to see if this project would be successful. So we started with 8 stations. We got them on board. Some of the features of the program are that there's real-time footage from the camera feeds into our real-time crime center. They get a priority response to 911 calls. They get regular virtual patrols and increased patrol visits to their locations. So that kind of takes us to where we are today with the program.
Good afternoon. This is Captain Kari Sloan. I'm going to tell you a little bit about where our project stands today. We have actually 386 businesses that are participating in the program today, and we have about 145 businesses that are waiting in our pipeline to join. On average, we receive about 35 calls for service to our Greenlight locations each day. We closely monitor those locations here at the RealTime Crime Center, and we have analysts and officers that feed information gained from the video feeds back to the responding officers in real time. We've also have the ability to perform proactive virtual patrols of the locations, and we have expanded our business model from traditional single businesses and buildings. Our program now includes corridor-style locations, which are in our entertainment districts, such as Greektown and Corktown. Those are areas where we have a large number of bars, restaurants, and shopping. Project Greenlight is not limited to liquor stores and gas stations. The project has grown to include plazas, Detroit Public Schools, vocational centers, and senior living apartment buildings. We feel that the project is improving relationships between the community and the department, and we've developed strong partnerships with these business owners and grown our community groups and advocacy for Project Greenlight. So the future state of the project is something that we're always thinking about. Our plan for growing Project Greenlight over the next year is to include publicly accessible areas of multifamily housing developments in hopes of increasing safety in those areas. And our staff is focused on scaling for growth of the project by staying on top of the latest technology with our research and development team. The team is working on technology improvement strategy plan for the next year that includes how to acquire and implement the newest technology. Another goal of Project Greenlight is to grow to 500 businesses by the end of 2018, and we anticipate we'll be able to meet that goal with our robust pipeline, and we have several businesses waiting to come on. We opened our RealTime Crime Center in November of 2017. And once we actually decided to build the RealTime Crime Center, we knew we needed to start researching best practices across the country. So a team was put in place that conducted site visits to other police departments throughout the country, where we were able to identify different parts of projects that we liked and found things we decided we wanted to implement here in Detroit. We also did a large amount of technical research in the beginning stages of the project. Mainly we had to find out what the requirements were to get the video from the businesses to headquarters and what the cost to do that would be. The Crime Intelligence Unit is the unit that's responsible for the operation of the Detroit Police Real-Time Crime Center, and we are now open 24/7 and staffed by 1/3 sworn to 2/3 non-sworn personnel. We monitor and manage Project Greenlight and provide intelligence for the entire department. There have been several other projects within the Crime Intel Unit, including our counterterrorism threat analysis team, which constantly monitors the critical infrastructure within the city. We evaluate national and international issues that may be relevant to our area and continually evaluate any threats against police. We also have a dumping camera project where the city has invested in a covert system of cameras that help us to identify people who have illegally dumped garbage in the city. This is something that's helped us close cases and address quality of life issues here in the city for our citizens. So again, some of the goals of the Real-Time Crime Center are, of course, to improve citizen and officer safety in the city of Detroit. And we believe that the program has leveraged technology to improve the investigative abilities within our Detective Bureau and provide actionable intelligence to officers on the street, which increases officer safety. So another thing that we're thinking about for sustainability is onboarding and compliance within the program. Onboarding has been something that we've worked on to streamline the application process, obtaining a signed MOU from businesses to agree to the terms of the program. And we do a site survey to ensure that the cameras are installed in places that the police department feels are most suitable. And along those lines, we focus on compliance. We've built an entire team that's dedicated to being out on the street and ensuring that the businesses are adhering to the requirements of the program. So we have a whole process in place where the businesses can be removed from the program if they fail to comply.
A little bit about the results and outcomes that we've seen so far. Over the last few years, we've seen a significant decrease in violent crime in and around the gas stations that have, or the businesses that have signed up to be Project Greenlight partners. We have a research partner in Michigan State University that is on board with us, and they conduct an analysis of the crime in those areas and have found that there's been a 23% decrease in violent crime from 2015 to 2018. We've been able to successfully use Project Greenlight footage to increase case closures and convictions. All of the cameras at these locations are high-definition cameras. They give us the ability to pick up license plates. And one of the requirements for being a partner is that one of the cameras is focused on the doorway when customers enter the location, and it's positioned in such a way that we capture images of the face of people who come into the business. So we've had a lot of success in using that footage either to put it out on the news and generate tips, or sometimes we're able to use that in facial recognition software and get positive hits to close cases. We have an annual Greenlight business partner meeting, which is a big hit with a lot of the business owners. Gives them an opportunity to come in. They get a tour of the Real-Time Crime Center. They're able to see where their business is being monitored. We can pull up the cameras in front of them to show them how we react to a call for service. They also get to interact with the police chief at that meeting. A lot of them have questions, so that builds good relationships. And our neighborhood police officers and our precinct command staff visit the location, which also increases the quality of the relationships that we have with all these business owners.
Okay, we have also been focusing on predictive analysis. Our team here at Crime Intel are tasked with identifying Greenlight locations that have a higher likelihood to have issues or to have a crime committed there. So we've been working with some tools like CrimeScape and using risk terrain modeling to watch video feeds at the right locations at the right time. We had a really excellent success with this. An example is we were able to identify a location that had a high probability of crime, that a crime would occur. During a shift, an analyst at Crime Intel was monitoring that location and was able to witness in real time a robbery and shooting that occurred. He was able to instantly push the information out regarding the crime, which included the suspect description, vehicle information, and direction of escape, and he was able to immediately call for medical attention for the victim within seconds. Fortunately, there were officers in the area who were able to respond quickly and aid the victim. Other officers were then able to locate the suspect vehicle and were able to arrest two perpetrators and recover the long gun used in the shooting after a short car chase. Thankfully, the victim recovered and was able to testify against the suspects who were found guilty on 10 felony counts. And something that we're really paying attention to now with our staffing is making sure that we scale appropriately for the businesses that are coming on into the project, along with the other responsibilities that we have here in the unit. We've done a very extensive time study to look at exactly what type of information and what products we're distributing here from Crime Intel, and taking that information and making sure that we're scaling appropriately and asking for the right amount of increases in our personnel budget. We're also focused strongly on consistent training. We were able to develop a 2-week program for new hires. So we feel that by adding consistency with our training, everybody's cross-trained, we're able to make sure that our product that we're putting out is consistent and sustainable.
A little bit about the lessons learned for us. This type of program requires buy-in at all levels, from the mayor, the chief, everybody all along the way. Here in Detroit, Project Greenlight has become a model that we use, that we repeat repeatedly over and over and over again. Every officer in the department knows what Project Greenlight is. They're all engaged in making stops at Greenlight locations. They reach out constantly to the Real-Time Crime Center for Greenlight information, for footage. But really having the buy-in from the mayor and the chief was really, really important, because they're the ones that are have the biggest voice in the community and talk about Project Greenlight all the time, and also are the ones that authorize funding and support for the project in staffing levels, building out the Real-Time Crime Center. Another lesson for us is that the success of Greenlight was only due in part to the cameras and software. And what we do here, a lot of it had to do with continually maintaining a positive relationship with the business owners and people in the community. We've actually had stories here in Detroit where we've had community groups that have picketed and protested around particular businesses, insisting that they become Project Greenlight partners, or they weren't going to support those businesses anymore. So really everybody around the whole city knows about Project Greenlight. And here we've just got a couple of news stories that we found. We get repeated visits here. About 60 law enforcement agencies and 55 private companies have come to visit our Real-Time Crime Center and learn more about Project Greenlight. These are a couple headlines that we found from Springfield. They're talking about implementing it. And then that picture of Chief Hall from Dallas PD, she's a former deputy chief here. They're going to implement Project Greenlight in Dallas. And we've also had visits from London, from Australia, all over, with a lot of interest in the program. So that wraps it up for us, and we'll be around for questions if anybody has any.
Thank you to all of our presenters for joining us this afternoon. At this point, we do have one question, and it is, I believe, for all of our presenters. And the question is, have your respective SPI results been helpful while interacting with police boards as evidence of effective and efficient operations and/or for strategic operational planning?
Well, I guess I'll jump in there first. Christian speaking. Yes, some of the lessons we learned through our hotspot policing have directly impacted our strategic planning process. We are actually right now in the process of building our new strategic plan, and some of the things we learned was we definitely needed more community involvement on the front end of implementing an intervention, and because of that, we're actually having community members on our foundation for our strategic planning process.
This is Captain Mills. I'll throw in my 2 cents as well. Has it been effective and efficient operations with our planning? It has been, you know, probably in a couple different ways. First is that it shows that we're trying to do something different. You know, it shows that we're active and engaged and we're working towards a solution. We're not passive with the presentation of the violent crime that is occurring in Kansas City. You know, we have historically, up until maybe the last 5, 7, 10 years, we've looked at policing kind of two-dimensional. You know, it's putting bad guys in jail and writing arrest reports and trying to get convictions. Well, we have learned we cannot arrest our way out of crime. We've tried to do that, and frankly, we've probably failed to some degree. I think looking at things through a different lens, which what this has allowed us to do, has really begun to shape the way that we police our city. You know, I use the analogy that 2 + 2 = 4 and 3 + 1 = 4. They're both the right answers, they're just a different way to get there. And utilizing, you know, the subject matter experts and the technical training that we've gotten through SPI and CNA and the ability to interact and connect with other organizations who are facing similar and different problems at the same time has helped us formulate better responses to issues that plague all of us. And that has been, that has increased the operations and made us more effective. And with interacting with the police boards as well, I assume we define police boards the same way other organizations do, but really it's about doing what we're supposed to be doing, the right time, the right reason, at the right place, and it has for us. Thank you.
Yeah, this is Detroit PD. So it has for us as well. I mean, like I mentioned in the presentation, we made this part of the way everybody in the entire department thinks. Everybody in the department talks about Project Greenlight. And one of the big pieces for us as well is making sure that we have adequate response and follow-up when we do have an incident that happens at a Greenlight location, because it does happen. Just because we put cameras and signs and lights at a location doesn't mean that there aren't crimes that occur, but when one does, we respond appropriately and aggressively so that everybody knows that these are safe havens that we're creating for individuals within the community, and that this type of conduct isn't going to be tolerated at those locations. And we make a big push in the media to put those stories out. We have our media relations group very intimately involved with what goes on in Greenlight so that they're able to get those stories out right away.
Thank you all. I believe we had another question just come in, and this question is for the Detroit Police Department. Regarding your analysis, were control groups used, and did you see displacement occur to non-Operation Greenlight locations?
So the control groups, I guess we're using Greenlight locations before and after, and then we looked at the 8 beginning businesses, and they had a reduction of 60%. And then overall throughout the city, throughout that entire period where we had the 23% reduction at the Greenlight locations, we had about a 12 or 14% reduction citywide at locations like that as well that aren't, throughout the entire city. So I don't have the analysis on the locations just that are not green lights. We just have it for all locations.
All right, thank you. At this point, we have no more questions, so if participants do have any more questions for our presenters, please do send them in now, or you can contact them after the webinar. The slides will be posted. So at this point, since we have no more questions, I'd like to turn it over to the SPI Project Manager, Chris Sun, to close out the webinar.
Thank you, Emma, and thank you to our presenters. I truly appreciate the insights, and then on the research side from Dr. White about what has been working for you, working in different ways. I kind of love the idea that Captain Mills provided around it's getting to the same outcome, just maybe in a different way. I think that's a good way to look at sustainability, as it might look a little bit different after the grant funding ends, but the ideals and the values and hopefully some of the agency processes can remain in place and still continue to have life and value for the agency. So thank you all for participating. When you leave today's webinar, we do ask that you take a moment to fill out the evaluation form. It should take maybe 2 or 3 minutes. It basically goes over some of the topics that we presented today, how well we did that, but it also is a great place for us to brainstorm and get your ideas about next topics for our SPI webinars. We love to get feedback from our audience members on topics of interest or, emerging topics that you all are seeing in the field that, I'm sure we have some SPI sites that might have been addressing that in one way or another. So we hope you'll be able to take a moment and fill out the evaluation form. But on behalf of BJA and our SPI team, we definitely thank you and our presenters for a wonderful event, and we look forward to engaging you in the future. So have a wonderful afternoon.